Beloved child, listen very carefully. This message like this is designed to create a very strong emotional and urgent reaction at the same time, especially when it says 3 minutes left and connects it with someone you love who is no longer here, because that combination directly touches two powerful parts of your mind, time pressure and emotional attachment, and when those two come together, your thinking can become fast, reactive, and uncertain, almost as if something important is happening right now, even when nothing in your actual surroundings has changed, and that is exactly why it feels so intense in the beginning. Think about your first reaction when you saw it, because that moment is important. There was likely a pause, a shift in your attention, maybe even a slight heaviness or curiosity, because the idea of someone you love trying to reach you again feels meaningful, it feels personal, and your mind naturally wants to respond to that, because it is connected to your memories, your emotions, and your past experiences. And when something touches those areas, it doesn't feel like a normal message anymore. It feels like something you shouldn't ignore, something that might matter more than everything else around you. At the same time, the message adds urgency, 3 minutes left, and this is where your mind begins to feel pressure, because when time is limited, your brain tries to react quickly, it tries to make a decision before thinking fully, and that is a natural response, because your brain is designed to protect you from missing something important. But the problem is that this reaction happens before logic has a chance to step in, and that is how such messages gain control over your attention. Now, as you continue reading and slow down, something begins to change. Your thoughts are no longer moving as fast as they were at the beginning. The emotional intensity starts to settle, and you begin to observe instead of react, and that shift is very important, because when you observe, you start to see things more clearly, you start to separate what you feel from what is actually real, and once you do that, the entire effect of the message begins to weaken. Ask yourself something simple and honest. What has actually changed around you right now, not what the message is suggesting, but what you can actually see, hear, or verify in your environment, and if you look carefully, you will notice that nothing has changed, everything is exactly the same as it was before you read those words. There is no real countdown, no real event, no real sign of something urgent happening. And this is the most important realization, because it shows you that the urgency you felt was not coming from reality, it was created by the message itself. God says this message from heaven. Your mind may still hold on to a small curiosity, a small, what if, because when something feels personal, it is hard to let it go immediately. But this is where awareness becomes your strength, because instead of following that thought, you can question it, you can ask yourself whether there is any real evidence supporting it, and when you realize there is none, that thought begins to lose its intensity, because it is no longer being treated as truth. I begging you still here. It is also important to understand the emotional part of this experience, because the feeling you had when you read about someone you love is real, it comes from your memories, your connection, and the impact that person had on your life, and those things are meaningful, they are part of who you are, but the way the message used that feeling is different, it turned it into urgency and pressure, and that is where the confusion comes from, because real connection does not create fear. It does not rush you, it does not say, act now or it's too late, instead it exists quietly, in your thoughts, in your memories, in the way you remember that person. Now, bring your focus back to your present moment again. Notice your surroundings, notice how everything is calm, stable, and unchanged, and this observation is what grounds you, because reality is always consistent. It does not depend on sudden emotional messages, it remains steady, and when you stay connected to that reality, your mind also becomes steady, because you are no longer chasing something uncertain. You are simply observing what is actually there. At this stage, your thoughts are no longer reacting to the message, they are understanding it, and this understanding changes everything, because once you understand how something works, it no longer has the same effect on you, and now you can clearly see the pattern. The message created urgency to rush you, it used emotion to connect with you, and it added pressure so you would act without thinking. But it did not provide any real information, any real proof, or any real situation that you can verify, and once you recognize that, the entire illusion breaks. You also begin to understand something deeper about your own mind, that it reacts quickly to anything that feels important, especially when it is connected to emotion, but not every reaction is based on reality, sometimes it is based on suggestion, and learning to recognize that difference is what makes your thinking stronger, because you are no longer controlled by every thought or feeling, you are choosing how to respond. As everything settles, the message itself becomes less important, it no longer feels urgent, it no longer feels meaningful, it simply becomes something you observed and understood, and what remains instead is your awareness, your ability to stay calm, your ability to think clearly, and your ability to remain in control, and these are far more valuable than anything the message tried to create. At this point, you can see clearly that nothing depended on those 3 minutes, nothing was going to change suddenly, nothing was going to be lost, and this realization brings a sense of peace, because it confirms that your life is not controlled by sudden messages or emotional triggers, it is shaped by your understanding, your awareness, and your choices. In the end, this leads you to a simple but powerful truth, that not everything that feels emotional is real, not everything that sounds urgent is true, and your response is what decides your experience, not the message itself, and once you understand this fully, you naturally remain calm, stable, and in control, no matter what kind of message appears in front of you, because you know how to separate what is real from what is suggested, and that ability is your real strength. This message is more benefits. God says something even more important begins to settle inside you, because now you are not just understanding the message, you are understanding your own reaction to it, and that is where real clarity comes from, because at the beginning, the feeling was strong, it felt urgent, emotional, and personal, but now, as you have slowed down and stayed present, that feeling is no longer the same, it has softened, it has become calmer, and this change itself shows you something very powerful, that your thoughts and emotions can shift when you choose awareness over reaction. Think about what actually happened inside your mind, because the message did not bring any real event into your life, it only created a situation in your thoughts, it gave you an idea, and your mind started building on that idea, connecting it with memories, emotions, and possibilities, and that is why it felt real for a moment, because your brain filled in the gaps, but now that you are observing it calmly, You can clearly see that there was no real situation behind it, and once you see that, the intensity disappears. Your mind may still try to return to the thought briefly, especially because it involved someone important to you, but now you have control, because instead of following that thought, you can notice it, question it, and let it pass, and that is what keeps your thinking stable, because you are no longer reacting automatically, you are choosing how to respond, and that choice is what gives you clarity. My dear beloved child, now bring your focus back again to your present moment. Everything around you is still the same, there is no countdown, no urgency, no real change in your surroundings, and this simple observation is enough to ground you, because reality is always consistent, it does not depend on sudden emotional triggers, and when you stay connected to that consistency, your mind becomes calm again, because you are no longer trying to solve something that does not exist. At this stage, you also begin to understand something deeper about emotions, that they can feel very real and very powerful, but they are not always based on something happening outside, sometimes they are triggered by thoughts, memories, or suggestions, and once you recognize that, you stop letting them control your actions, and instead you use awareness to guide your response. This awareness is what protects you, because it helps you recognize patterns, you begin to see how urgency, emotion, and pressure are used together to create a reaction, and once you see that clearly, you naturally pause instead of reacting, and that pause is what keeps you in control, because it gives you the space to think before acting. In the end, what you gain from this is not fear, but understanding, not confusion, but clarity, because you now know that not everything that feels emotional is real, not everything that sounds urgent is true, and your peace depends on how you process what you feel, not on what tries to influence you, and once this understanding becomes part of your thinking, you naturally remain calm, aware, and in control in any similar situation, because you know how to stay grounded in reality. If you're not watching this video, then I will. As you move further into this understanding, something even deeper becomes clear, because now you are not just calming your mind, you are fully seeing how it works, and that awareness gives you a different kind of control, because at the beginning, the message felt powerful, almost like it had some kind of importance or urgency attached to it. But now you can clearly recognize that the power never came from the message itself, it came from how your mind reacted to it, and once your reaction changed, the entire effect disappeared. Think about how your thoughts behaved step by step. At first they were quick, searching, trying to make sense of the situation, trying to connect it with something personal, but now they are slower, clearer, more stable, because you are no longer trying to find meaning in something that has no real context, and this is a very important shift, because it shows that your mind naturally settles when it realizes there is nothing real to respond to, and that is why you feel calmer now than you did at the beginning. You also begin to understand something very important about attention, that whatever you focus on starts to feel more significant, and at the start, your focus was completely on the message, which is why it felt intense, but now your focus has shifted to understanding it, and that shift removes its importance, because you are no longer feeding it with attention, and this is a key realization, because it means you can choose where your attention goes, and that choice decides what affects you and what does not. At this stage, your mind is no longer creating what-if scenarios, because you have already seen that there is no real situation behind the message, and when your mind understands that clearly, it stops producing unnecessary thoughts, and this is where stability comes from, because you are no longer reacting to possibilities, you are staying grounded in what is actually happening, and what is actually happening is simple. Everything around you is normal, unchanged, and under your control. You also begin to see that emotions, no matter how strong they feel, are not always a reflection of reality, they can be triggered by words, by memories, or by suggestion, and once you understand this, you stop treating every emotion as something that requires action, and instead you observe it, understand it, and let it pass, and that is what keeps your mind balanced. Now, at this point, you are not reacting anymore, you are aware, and awareness is what protects you, because once you know how these patterns work, they cannot easily influence you again, and this is what you carry forward, not just from this message, but into every similar situation in the future, the ability to pause, to observe, and to think before reacting. In the end, this leads you to a very simple truth, that not everything that feels urgent is real, not everything that feels personal is true, and your strength lies in your ability to stay calm and think clearly, no matter what appears in front of you, and once you understand this deeply, you naturally remain in control, because you are no longer reacting blindly, you are responding with awareness. God says this message for you: as you reach this stage, everything becomes completely clear and steady inside your mind, because now there is no confusion, no urgency, and no emotional pull left from that message, only understanding, and that understanding shows you something very important, that nothing in your real life was ever connected to it, nothing changed, nothing was actually happening, and the entire effect existed only for a moment inside your thoughts, created by the way the message was written, and once you slowed down and observed it calmly, that effect disappeared completely. Now you can also see how your mind handled the situation. At first it reacted quickly, trying to understand, trying to connect it with something personal, but as you continued to think logically, those thoughts started to settle, because they were not supported by anything real, and this is a very important realization, because it shows you that not every thought needs your attention, especially when it is triggered by something unclear or urgent, and once you understand this, you naturally stop reacting instantly and start observing your thoughts instead, which keeps your mind stable and in control. Bring your focus back again to your present moment. Everything around you is still normal, nothing has changed, there is no real situation that requires urgency or action, and this simple truth is what grounds you, because reality is always consistent, it does not depend on sudden emotional triggers, and when you stay connected to that reality, your mind becomes calm and clear again. At this stage, you are fully in control of your response, because you are no longer reacting to what you read, you are deciding how to think and how to respond, and that control is what protects your peace, because once you have it, no message can easily disturb your mind, no matter how emotional or urgent it may seem. In the end, this becomes a simple and powerful understanding, that not everything urgent is real, not everything emotional is true, and not everything that tries to rush you deserves your reaction, and once you carry this understanding forward, you naturally remain calm, aware, and in control in every similar situation, because you know how to pause, observe, and think clearly before reacting, and that ability is your real strength. If you ignore this message before it's too late, and I am going to own home at this final stage, everything becomes completely settled and quiet inside your mind, because now there is no curiosity left, no emotional pull, and no sense of urgency, only clarity, and that clarity shows you something very simple and very powerful, that nothing in your real life was ever connected to that message, nothing changed, nothing needed your action, and whatever you felt in the beginning existed only for a moment inside your thoughts, and once you slowed down and understood it, it naturally faded away. Now you can clearly see the full journey of your thinking, how it started with a quick emotional reaction, moved into questioning, and finally reached a point of complete understanding, and this process itself is your strength, because it proves that you are not controlled by every thought or feeling that comes into your mind, you have the ability to step back, observe, and guide your thinking toward clarity, and that ability is what keeps you stable in situations like this. At this point, your mind is no longer trying to imagine or search for meaning in something that had none, and this calmness allows you to focus on what actually matters, your real life, your real surroundings, and your present moment, because that is where everything real exists, not in sudden or emotional messages, but in what you can actually see and experience.